ask them to rise, they will. Kind of with our arms when we sing this. You ready? Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rain's new fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet morning, sprung in completeness where God's feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the world light, Eden's the play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing, liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world, or as we like to say in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. Great to see all of you. Oh, happy Easter, by the way. So everybody is dressed like an Easter egg today, including me. Lots of color. But welcome to all of you on this great Sunday, whatever Easter means to you. I hope it's a happy day for you. And I do want to, as always, start by embracing and acknowledging all of the uniqueness that you bring with you. All of your unique beliefs, your background, your lifestyle, your experiences, all that make you who you are, is welcome here today. And this is true, of course, for those who hear us say this each Sunday as an important part of our time together, as well as those of you who might be hearing it for the first time. And I do see a few unfamiliar faces out there. Welcome to you. You're equally as embraced and appreciated for all that you bring with you to this space and to our world. And this also includes those of you who are streaming with us, of course. We're always glad to know that you're with us as well. So welcome to one and all. We're going to take a few moments to greet one another in a few seconds, but first, a reminder that this is our annual generosity campaign, in which we're hoping that as many of you as possible will fill out a pledge card letting us know of what your intentions are around your financial gifts to the church this year so that we can plan accordingly. The way it works here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane is we have an annual meeting that will come up this summer in June, and that will be your opportunity to pass our annual budget. So we kind of need to know what we can expect to put that budget together, because you won't let us pass an unbalanced budget, even though I've tried. So, if you hear the bell ring during the social period, that is not an angel getting its wing, but that is the Unitarian Church getting a pledge card. So, almost as important. So let's hear those ring after the service. Also want to, as has become part of our tradition, invite one of our members who is a contributing member to come forward and share just a little bit about why this church is important to them and why they feel it's important enough to contribute in a variety of ways. And today we're privileged to have church member Betsy Lawrence.
Nearly 30 years ago, I moved away from my lifelong Presbyterian beliefs, yet still very much considered myself a church-joining, community-minded theist. I dreamed of a church that was inclusive, active, and spiritual. When I found the UU Church of Spokane, I truly believed I had invented it. Through my decades of membership here, there have been moments where I felt people of all beliefs were accepted, except those of us who embrace God as an image that spiritually sustains us. So I've worked to communicate in words and actions that to genuinely live our principles, that bias needed to change. In the past few years, I am happy to say I have seen much softening towards spiritual differences in the congregation, and I'm confident that is because we agree about what is important and try to live by our principles. The third UU principle is acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. And that is what we must strive to do. It is because of this ideal and the other 6 principles that we embrace, I'm committed to giving generously of my money, time, and talents to the UU Church of Spokane and have made an annual pledge for 28 years. Whatever brought you here and keeps you here, whatever spiritual lens enriches your path, I urge you to make a pledge to share your riches, to support this place where we are committed to learn, change, and work to fully accept all who come here.
Thanks again, Betsy. Let's take a few moments now to greet one another, and as always, I hope that you will say hi to those that you look forward to seeing each Sunday. I also hope that you will make some new friends today. We have lots of folks that are joining us perhaps for the first time today. Please say hi to them, and if you are among those visitors, I hope that you won't be shy. Nobody around here has ever been bitten by another church member, so you're safe. So extend a hand and say hi to one another. Place for it. Yeah.
I made it before the sermon.
Man, that's harder than breaking up a bar fight. There will be more opportunity to visit with one another after our service during our social hour, so please do stick around for that. We are going to move forward now with our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our faith, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need, and may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
Our opening words this morning are from the poet Wendell Berry. They are fighting again the war to end war. And the ewe flock, bred in October, brings forth in March. This, so far, remains, this pain and renewal, whatever war is being fought. We go through the annual passage of birth and death, triumph and heartbreak, love and exasperation, mud and milk and mucus and blood. Yet once more, the young ewe stands with her lambs in the dawnlight, the lambs well suckled and dry. There is no happiness like this. The window again welcomes in the light of lengthening days. The river, in its old groove, passes again beneath opening leaves. In their brevity, between cold and shade, flowers again brighten the wood's floor. This, then, may be the prayer without ceasing, this beauty and gratitude, this moment.
Our first in-service hymn today actually underlines several of our principles, and it's a beautiful one to boot. Please rise to sing number 134. Our world is one world. 134.
Good morning. So before we get into our time for all ages, it is Easter, and I am going to shamelessly take advantage of having a mic in my hand and let you all know that after the service, there is an Easter-ish party to which you are all invited with an egg hunt and crafts and snack, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So now, I'd like to invite our young and our young at heart forward for our time for all ages. So Easter is a really confusing time for me because it's not really a UU holiday. It's part of our history, but it's not a UU holiday. And there are a lot of different ways that people think about Easter. So I am curious to hear what traditions you all have around Easter. What kinds of things do you do on Easter morning?
Everyone gets a basket of like candy, eggs, and stuff.
Anything else?
Egg hunt.
Yeah, an egg hunt. And do any of you dye your own eggs?
We usually do, but we don't usually call it Easter. We call it Ostara. Because you're pagan.
Can you tell me a little more about Ostara?
Ostara is basically the same as Easter.
A lot of the same traditions?
There goes my sermon.
Anything else that you'd like to share? Well, you also do an egg hunt. And how do you have any special traditions about how you decorate your eggs?
We just got like these eggs this year to paint, but they were so big that they couldn't fit in a cup, so we're going to have to hand paint them.
Nice. Well, thank you. I'm so glad to hear what you all do for Easter. It gives me a little inspiration. One of the ways that I think about Easter, inspired by Sophia Lyon-Foss, is that it's a time to also remember the people that we've lost, that we love, and how we remember them and how we keep them alive and keep their words of wisdom alive in our hearts. So thank you for sharing. I'm so glad to hear all your traditions. Now please join me in singing Our Children Out with hymn number 413, Go Now in Peace.
We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission in the wider world.
We'll now kindle our candles of care for those who are most on our hearts and minds this morning. I want to begin with a candle for Isabel Green, one of our church members whose husband Ronnie passed away last week. And a candle for church member Bree Hernandez, who is recovering from surgery that she had last week. Let's take a moment of silence now on behalf of others that you might be thinking of, and as always, you're welcome to name them aloud if you'd like. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence, and all those who are suffering in our world at this hour, we hold in our community with compassion.
This is the time in our service where we pause for a few moments of silent meditation, so I invite you to make yourself comfortable as you wish. Take a breath, maybe close your eyes. The words to take us into our meditation this morning come from the writer Annie Dillard from Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. It has always been a happy thought to me that the creek runs on all night, new every minute, whether I wish it or know it or care, as a closed book on a shelf continues to whisper to itself its own inexhaustible tale.
For our reading this morning, I invite you to turn to number 627 in the back of the gray hymnal. Number 627. As always, if there's not enough hymnals in your row, please share with a neighbor. Number 627, and why don't we start with this side of the room as our beginners, and this side can be our respondents, and then we will close on the last verse together.
And push life out
and life will never come again, despite the fact of spring.
Well, you may know, but this is actually a dual holiday. It's also April Fool's Day. So that being said, you just might never be able to tell what you're going to hear next.
A tisket, a tasket, a green and yellow basket. I bought a basket for my mommy. On the way I dropped it. I dropped it, my green and yellow basket. A little girlie picked it up and put it to the market.
I was a-trucking on down the avenue with not a single thing to do. I was pecking all around when I spied it on the ground.
A tisket, a tasket, she took my yellow basket. And if she doesn't bring it back, I think that I will cry.
Still trucking on down that avenue with just a single thing to do. I was looking all around. I just wanted to hide it all around.
She took it, she took it. She took my little basket. And if she doesn't bring it back, I think that I will die.
Was it red?
No, 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 no.
Was it brown?
No, 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 no.
Was it blue?
No, 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 no. Just a little yellow basket.
Just a little yellow basket.
Thank you so much. That's really a tough act to follow. So as Deb mentioned, this is a confluence of two holidays, Easter and April Fool's Day. And the response from some upon seeing that I'm actually giving a sermon about resurrection on Easter Sunday has been, "You must be joking." As a non-Christian, Easter isn't a meaningful holiday for me. And one can only spin the occasion to talk about the renewal of spring so many times. So I prefer treating it as usual by offering a sermon on some random topic of my choice. On this occasion, it just so happens it prompted me to want to have a serious discourse about the emergence of the resurrection motif and the possibility of resurrection ever really happening. So no, this is not an April Fool's joke. Someone did mention they were told that I was wearing a tie the first service. That's not true. That would have been an April Fool's joke. But I am going to seize Easter being on April 1st as an opportunity to tell the only resurrection joke I know. Something that we used to tell as Southern Baptists, so I'm sure it's appropriate to misappropriate for us Unitarian Universalists. So 3 people appear before the pearly gates of heaven. And as part of our misappropriation, why don't we make them an atheist, an agnostic, and a Unitarian? So the atheist says, "I can't believe I'm here." The agnostic says, I'm not sure I am. And the Unitarian holds up a protest sign demanding the gate be removed. Now, that's not the joke. That's just, my embellishment of the joke. So St. Peter tells them that they can all enter so long as they correctly answer one simple question. What is the meaning of Easter? The atheist says, I'm confident Easter is the day we have picnics and set off fireworks to celebrate our freedom and our independence. The agnostic says, I'm not sure, but I think Easter is either a long weekend in September when we celebrate the labor movement, or else it's a day in February we honor the nation's president. St. Peter is disappointed with their answers, but being merciful says that if the Unitarian gets it right, he'll let all of them in. It's been a while, the Unitarian says, but if memory serves, it begins with the death of Jesus. Why, that's right, Peter is pleasantly surprised. Please continue. Afterward, they laid him in the tomb and sealed it with a stone, the Unitarian says. Yes, Peter delights. On the third day, the Unitarian says, the disciples arrive and discover the stone has been rolled back and the tomb is open. That's it, Peter says, overwhelmed with joy. Then what? Then the Unitarian says, Jesus emerges from the tomb, sees his shadow, and turns around and goes back in for 6 weeks. It's an oldie but a goodie. So all kidding aside, more than 2 billion, close to 2.5 billion people around the world today are celebrating what they believe is the physical resurrection of Christ. As for me, I'm about as confident as I am about anything that such an event could not and therefore did not happen. When asked how I can be so sure, I say because it seems evident that people can't rise from the dead. While it is now possible to resuscitate one whose heart has stopped beating for up to 20 minutes, longer if they've gone into hypothermia, no knowledge or power on earth yet exists that can bring a person back to life after they've been dead for more than an hour, let alone after days or years. There may come a time when such technology exists, which is why some people have their bodies frozen, hoping they will someday be revived. But such technology isn't here yet and certainly did not exist 2 millennia ago. How then do we explain the widespread belief in Christ's resurrection after all this time? To answer this, it's necessary to understand the early evolution of the various resurrection stories about him. It's also helpful to keep in mind that Jesus wasn't always considered Christ. In the beginning, he was considered no more than a man, even by his followers. It was only later, years after his death, that people began to call him and consider him Christos, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew word Messiah. For the Hebrews, however, the Messiah would have been thought of strictly as a human being, anointed by Yahweh to liberate and restore oppressed Israel to its Davidic glory. For the Greeks and Romans, who dominated the Jews and ended up appropriating Christianity, there was no problem deifying a human being or believing that a man can ascend into the heavens to become and to dwell among the gods. The differing gospel accounts reflect the transition of Christianity from a small mostly Jewish sect to the dominant, mostly Greco-Roman religion. The first gospel, at least the earliest gospel, the Gospel of Mark, written in 65 CE, does not include a resurrection appearance. Some of his followers are said to simply have discovered the empty tomb, whereupon a young man dressed in white says, "Be not afraid," which is what the angels always say in the Hebrew Scriptures when they show up, "Be not afraid. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they lay him." And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing. Although Mark's redactors eventually added endings that better correspond with the evolving resurrection beliefs, one in the late 2nd century that has Jesus appearing, eating, and drinking, instructing his followers to become poisonous snake handlers, which some in Kentucky still do. I came here from Kentucky, so I can say that. Then ascending into heaven. And the one, sometime in the late 4th or early 5th century, that has Jesus simply sending his followers out into the world to spread the gospel. The original account, written 30 years after his death, that ends with his followers discovering an empty tomb, too frightened to tell anyone about it, feels much more like a literary device meant to make the reader imagine the fictional possibility that in some way Jesus might live on, and we shouldn't be afraid to tell his story. In brief, resurrection in the earliest account was a literary metaphor, a hopeful way of ending an otherwise tragic tale, and encouraging his followers to move forward, which is a beautiful way to end that story. If I was ending a sermon, I would probably end it that way. But this is not the end. By the time Matthew gets written 20 years later, in 85 CE, the story had evolved enough for its author to have included a Jesus sighting, which again wasn't in the original first gospel. Though there was no reported contact with him. Instead, the account has Jesus telling his disciples, "Remember, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age." This is the same gospel that earlier has Jesus telling his disciples, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am in your midst." Herein, the resurrection is no longer a literary metaphor, but is seen as a spiritual truth, that somehow, even if he is unseen, even if he has died, Jesus is always with his followers whenever they gather together, even unto the end of time. It may be that some Christians went on to claim that they had encounters with the Spirit of Jesus themselves, or Jesus sightings. This is actually the case with the Apostle Paul, who claims to have been converted when he experiences Jesus, not as a person, but as a bright light on the road to Damascus. Keep in mind, Paul told his stories before the Gospels were even written. But as the myth developed and people began to take it more literally, a natural problem emerged. A natural question, right? If Jesus has risen and he's still literally with them, where is he? Why aren't more people seeing him? So the Gospel of Luke comes to the rescue in 90 CE by adding an ascension account to the story, to the evolving story. Again, this wasn't hard for those Greeks and Romans attracted to this new esoteric cult of Christ, given that they were already used to revering emperors dying and ascending to dwell among the gods. In fact, Roman Emperor Augustus, who was said to have done many of the things that the author of Luke, a Greek, believed to be a Greek, later claimed about Jesus. including being born of a virgin, walking on water, changing water into wine, performing miracles, dying, rising again, and ascending to be with the gods, becoming a god. For the Greeks and Romans to accept the greatness of a dead Jewish teacher, which was a big deal, he would at the very least have to have been as august as one of their ascendant emperors. At this point, the Christians not only wondered and argued whether Jesus was human or divine, but whether his resurrection was spiritual or physical. Hence, the last canonical gospel written, the Gospel of John, at the beginning of the 2nd century CE, adds the story of doubting Thomas. You remember that one where Thomas actually fills the scars, the wounds left from Jesus' crucifixion, proving that it was physical, indeed physical. So that, in short, is how the story evolved. From a metaphor in the beginning through a spiritual and a divine phase to, in less than 100 years after his death, becoming a story that was believed to be referred to a physical resurrection, a physical historical event, a belief that has lasted to this day, for the most part. It also seems likely once Christianity became Romanized, it would take on many of the established beliefs, rituals, and holidays that they had in its own fashion. And one of those would naturally have been a celebration of the vernal equinox, which happens now at the start of spring. The ancients celebrated it in honor of the goddess of the east, from whence the sun appears to rise. Her name, as we heard earlier from one of our young scholars, Oristra, or sometimes Iastre, which may likely go even farther back to the Assyrian goddess of fertility, Ishtar. All of which, from which we obviously would get the word Easter. As the young fellow said, tell us about Orista. It's pretty much the same as Easter. Well put. The Romans may have accepted Christianity as the official state religion once Emperor Constantine declared it so, but it would have been hard for them to give up their traditional holidays. So just as the Romans appropriated and renamed the Greek gods, the Holy Roman Church appropriated the pagan celebration of the vernal equinox and made it their own. Easter. In this sense, the resurrection retains some of its original meaning as a metaphor in this case of the rising sun, the sun up in the sky, not the Son of God. As such, Christ, sometimes called the light of the world, joins a plethora of mythical sun deities thought to bring light to the world, like the Greek god Horus, Helios, Attis, or Dionysus, the Roman Sol, the Persian Mithra, the Assyrian Tammuz, the Egyptian Osiris and Ra, the Norse Odin, the Aztec Quetzalcoatl, and India's Krishna, were all said to have been born on or around December 25th, near the winter solstice, when, that is, the sun returns and the days begin lengthening. As M.M. Mangasarian says in his classic work, The Truth About Jesus, the inference is that the Son of God and the Son of Heaven, enjoying the same birthday, were one and identical beings. Because of this and other mythical allusions, Mangasarian, who was actually a minister of this church in 1916, believed that Jesus was entirely mythical, that there was no such historical person to begin with. And while he makes a convincing argument, if you ever read his book, I still think there's enough out there to suggest that Jesus was a real person, though it's not possible to know much about him or who he really was. And it is the Christ of faith that is no more than a mythical invention. For this reason, I also believe that Christianity would exist today with or without Jesus ever having lived or died. In his letter to the Corinthians, the Apostle Paul writes, "If Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain." But Constantine could have easily based his centralized religion on numerous other resurrection deities, whether Mithras, Helios, Sol, Dionysus, or some of the others I've mentioned, or some other made-up deity based upon the real life of another historical individual. I believe we would still have a major world religion today with many of the same qualities and same history as Christianity. Because that's the mythos that people were attracted to. So that's a bit about the history and the origins of the resurrection myth, of how it evolved during the first 100 years of Christianity and has pretty much remained the same ever since, and of how what began as a creative literary metaphor likely ended up blending well with the pre-established practices of those in the ancient Greco-Roman world, especially when it came to celebrating the vernal equinox in honor of Eastri and Ishtar. Hence, to be clear, I personally consider the story of Christ's resurrection just that, an ancient myth, and do not believe it could possibly have been a historical or physical event. In short, I do not believe that anyone, not one person, has ever risen from death. But as is our Unitarian Universalist way, it's okay if you do. Just as it's okay if I don't. But this doesn't mean that I don't believe resurrection isn't possible, at least not theoretically. And that as science and medicine progress, it won't someday become common practice. This is why since the 1960s, a small handful of people, only about 250 I understand, have had their bodies frozen after death so that they can be revived when such technology might come to exist. Of course, just because 250 people believe something doesn't make it so, any more than 2.5 billion people believing something makes it so. Nor is it necessarily fair, given the decaying process is immediately halted through the freezing, to make the claim that these cryonic patients might be resurrected rather than revived or resuscitated. We already know it's possible to revive someone whose vitals have stopped for short periods of time, longer if they've gone into hypothermia, but no one has ever been resuscitated after the decaying process sets in. So the real question is, will genuine resurrection ever become possible? Is it possible, at least theoretically, to restore people to life who have long ago turned into ashes or dust? Will it ever be possible, as the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel imagined 500 years before Christ, "Your dead shall live, their corpses shall rise. O dwellers in the dust, awake and sing for joy, for your dew is radiant dew, and the earth will give birth to those long dead." As impossible as this may seem to us now, physicist Frank Tipler doesn't think that it is out of the question. In his book, The Physics of Immortality, Tipler says, resurrection theory is pure physics. There's nothing supernatural in the theory, and hence there is no appeal anywhere to faith. Removing the question from religion and firmly rejecting Christ's physical resurrection, Tipler goes on to consider it from the perspective of physics and math, suggesting that resurrection is already happening all of the time. At the subnuclear level, he says, the quarks and gluons which make up the neutrons and protons of the atoms in our bodies are being annihilated and recreated on a timescale of less than 10 to the negative 23 times a second in the normal course of our lives. Thus, we are actually being annihilated and replicated. Resurrected, he says, 10 to the negative 23 times every second of our lives. It's just a matter of mathematics for Tipler, who reminds us, though there seems to be an endless number of possibilities in the universe, that the number, though large, is actually finite. And with the right computer, when it actually exists, it will be able to calculate all of them. The dead will be resurrected, he says, when the computer capacity of the universe is so large that the amount of capacity required to store all human simulations is an insignificant fraction of its entire capacity. In fact, Tipler has already calculated the number of possibilities that each of us has. 4 times 10 to the 53rd power per second, which is huge, considering that the average person lives about 2.5 billion seconds. But it's finite. So he reasons that once computers achieve the ability to calculate every quantum state down to 10 to the 10th power to the 123rd power, or bits, they will be able to resurrect everyone who has ever lived. And why would these intelligent machines want to resurrect us? To be or not to be? Tipler suggests, in brief, that it will be out of curiosity about their own beginnings and origins. Strictly speaking, he says, the question of whether we shall be raised is separate from the question of whether we shall be granted eternal life after being raised. Other scientists today, including Ray Kurzweil, who some of you may be more familiar with, who in 1965 won the International Science Fair when he was 17, and received the National Medal of Technology from President Clinton in 1999, and was hired by Google in 2012 at age 64 to work in the area of artificial intelligence and speech recognition. He's also a best-selling author of books about the future of technology, like The Age of Spiritual Machines and The Singularity is Near, among others. In short, Kurzweil, like Tipler, believes that our technology and our biology are rapidly coming together, and that in the very near future, we will transcend into a new kind of human species, almost overnight, without even noticing it. We've already seen this to some degree through the behavioral transformation and new abilities our species has brought on by the exponential evolution of computers, the internet, and the cell phones that have changed our lives in recent years. Just yesterday, through the very new technology of virtual reality, I spent about an hour designing and furnishing a virtual home that towers above a futuristic city with holographic billboards and driverless cars and trucks whizzing past me on the streets and interstates below. I then sat down on the balcony of my virtual home as if I'd been transported inside to this beautiful computer simulation, experiencing it in 360 degrees all around me. Then therein, opened my virtual desktop, clicked my virtual Kindle app, and began reading a virtual book on the decline of democracy. If this sounds strange and you've not yet experienced virtual reality, you will very soon, as it becomes as ubiquitous as cell phones within the coming months, maybe even replacing cell phones within the coming months, and is sure to transform us and our society even more quickly than anything else has. It's one thing to use a computer program. Wait until you experience what it's like to be inside a computer program. The merger is already happening and is poised to suddenly change everything. During the 21st century, right now, Kurzweil estimates technology will advance 1,000 times greater than was achieved during the 20th century. This singularity, as he calls the point at which the universe becomes self-aware, will represent the culmination of the merger of our biological thinking and existence with our technology, resulting in a world that is still human, but transcends our biological roots. When this happens, he continues, our mortality will be in our own hands. We will be able to live as long as we want. A subtly different statement than saying we will live forever. We will fully understand human thinking and will vastly extend and expand its reach. By the end of this century, he predicts, the non-biological portion of our intelligence will be trillions of times more powerful than unaided human intelligence. In short, he's not only predicting a computer fast enough to calculate every quantum state of human experience, but that we will be that computer. A self-aware, emotional being that has evolved from what we are right now. So let me close by briefly talking about right now. Not the distant past or the near future. As exciting or as terrifying as it might sound. The most famous figure in Tibet, has probably became as mythical as Christ over the years, was Retsun Milarepa, considered their greatest mystic in history. The Dalai Lama has said, I cry, weep, and feel a strong sense of faith each time I read or hear the story of Milarepa, the great yogi of Tibet. Buddhists, as you know, believe in reincarnation, that we are all trapped in unhealthy habits over many lifetimes until we awaken and find release. Although the Buddha is considered the first ever to have achieved such nirvana, there's no telling how many lives he may have lived before doing so. According to Tibetan Buddhism, Milarepa is the only person ever to have achieved nirvana in one lifetime. Through the course of his life, having seen his family killed, his entire family killed when he was a child, growing up in poverty because of it, he was vengeful and murderous and did many terrible things. But later in life, he realized his mistakes and was able to stop repeating them. That's it. Milarepa was just an ordinary person with lots of tough breaks, bruises, warts, who learned to become a better person, not in the by and by, but in the here and now. And this is how I think a talk about resurrection should end. That no matter how much faith we have in old stories or place in future technologies, the one thing we can be sure of is that each of us has one lifetime. This lifetime. And it's up to us to make the best of it and become the best person we possibly can while we can. Happy Easter, Ishtar, or Easter.
Well, we're actually going to close to celebrate that other great yearly transformation that happens for us on the planet, which is spring and light coming back to us again. We're going to sing number 63, Spring has now unwrapped the flowers, and I'm going to ask Michelina to play it through all the way so that you can hear it, because we don't sing it that often. Please stand as you're willing and able. Spring has now unwrapped the flowers. Spring has now unwrapped the flowers, day is fast reviving, life in all her growing powers, toward the light is driving. Calm the iron touch of cold, winter time and frost time, seedlings working through the mold, now make up for lost time. Herb and plant that winter long slumbered at their leisure, now be stirring green and strong, finding growth and pleasure. All the world with beauty fills, gold the green enhancing, flowers make glee among the hills, set the meadows dancing.
Our closing words this morning are a poem from Mary Oliver entitled Prayer. May I never not be frisky. May I never not be risque. May my ashes, when you have them, friend, and give them to the ocean, leap in the froth of the waves, still loving movement, still ready, beyond all else, to dance for the world. Amen. Blessed be. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom.